Super Lucky Disaster Man. Chapter 76, Misfortune Leads to Fortune. The driver stiffened, holding his gun awkwardly for 3 seconds. His gaze moved from the seemingly harmless boy in front of him, who was almost entirely soaked in blood, to the gun in his own hand. Mother of... Why didn't he put the safety on before sticking it in his pocket? What if it accidentally discharges? The driver felt horrified, realizing that he was probably dealing with someone whose head wasn't quite right. A normal person wouldn't put a gun like that by their side without engaging the safety. And all that blood on him. What had this guy just done? Killed someone and dismembered them? Even if he stood a bit farther away, it wouldn't make sense for him to end up covered in that much blood. Plus, this guy had such a strange attitude towards being kidnapped. Knowing there was a warehouse full of bombs here, his first reaction was to burst out laughing. Definitely a psychopath. Absolutely a psychopath. Yokohama used to be really dangerous, but lately things had improved quite a bit, right? That was why the driver dared to come back. And yet he'd ended up with someone like this, a psycho who didn't even engage the gun's safety. Why was his life so miserable? Still, he wasn't ready to give up just yet. After all, everyone had dreams. What if he managed to pull this off? The driver forced a nervous smile and slowly lowered the gun. Ha, it's a misunderstanding, just a misunderstanding. We can talk this out. He discreetly moved his fingers, trying to disengage the gun's safety. Damn, he shouldn't have underestimated the guy in the first place, thinking he could just scare him, so he hadn't activated the safety. But it wasn't too late now. If he succeeded, at least he could reclaim half the victory. Even though he'd learned his lesson, the sight of a teenager still made the driver subconsciously underestimate him. Bang! A bullet whizzed past his ear, and the driver froze in place. Shit! He actually fired. That's too decisive. Drop the gun on the ground and put your hands up. Since I still need you to drive, I wasn't aiming at you. But if there's a next time, I'll have no choice but to aim at you, okay? The silver-haired demon smiled brightly, but there was a dangerous glint in his eyes. He asked in a gentle, polite tone. If possible, I really don't want to do anything else. I just need you to do me a favor. Would you be able to help me? Driver. Your way of asking for a favor is really very sincere, so sincere that it's hard for anyone to refuse. The driver obediently threw down the gun, with no resistance left in him. It seemed like this guy didn't plan on killing him to tie up loose ends, so it was better to just go along with it. Annoying a psycho was never safe. If he could make it home in one piece, he would leave Yokohama tonight and never come back, no matter who said Yokohama was a good place to make easy money. In the end, the entire time, the driver was forced at gunpoint by Komaeda Nagito to load the bombs into the trunk. He had left it empty for the kidnapping, usually keeping a rope or something in there, but this time it conveniently held all of Komaeda Nagito's bombs. Then he also stuffed the back seat full of bomb crates before finally sitting down in the front row with Komaeda Nagito. Is this alright, young master? The driver sighed, adding a slightly mocking tone to his polite words. What do you even need all these bombs for? Isn't this enough? I'm telling you, these bombs aren't cheap. Komaeda Nagito, sitting in the passenger seat, held the gun on the driver with one hand while checking his phone with the other. I'm not sure if it's enough, but I can't carry any more. Ah. His phone rang, showing the caller ID Edgar Allan Poe. He immediately answered. Poe-kun. We think it's somewhere around a Western-style mansion in the West. I'll send the coordinates to your email in a moment, but the intel is from yesterday, so we can't be sure whether they moved after the failed attack yesterday. Thanks, Poe-kun, that's enough. Edgar Allan Poe, knowing that Komaeda Nagito was on good terms with Dazai Osamu, assumed that Komaeda Nagito was helping out the port mafia, so he didn't question it much. He laughed and said, Does this mean we beat Ranpo? Ha, well, Komaeda Nagito laughed and brushed Edgar Allan Poe off. What could he do? When he tricked Edgar Allan Poe into helping him, he used his words to make Edgar Allan Poe think that Edogawa Ranpo hadn't figured it out. That was the only reason Edgar Allan Poe got interested in the first place. In fact, Edogawa Ranpo hadn't even started investigating, and Komaeda Nagito still didn't know which side was stronger, so he couldn't give a definitive answer. Edgar Allan Poe, seemingly not used to interacting with people, was clearly so strong in detective skills yet fell for such simple tricks. He didn't notice anything strange even after hanging up the call. After ending the call, Komaeda Nagito checked his email and gave the address to the driver. "Take me here." "Alright, make sure you sit tight." The driver said expressionlessly as he started the car, pushing it to the speed limit allowed by traffic laws, wanting to quickly drop off this demon and escape. If he weren't carrying someone's life on his back, he would have already handed this lunatic over to the police right now. As they drove, it started to rain outside. Yesterday it had rained a bit too, but it stopped quickly. Today, though, the rain kept coming down harder. The driver turned on the wipers, feeling the silence grow awkward, so he tried to make small talk. "What are you doing over there?" "Taking bombs with you. It's raining now. Should we call it off?" Komaeda Nagito looked at the raindrops beating on the windshield and thought for a moment. "No, keep going. Maybe by the time we get there, the rain will stop." The driver looked at the pouring rain outside and didn't dare answer carelessly. But what else could he do now? His life was still in this guy's hands. At this distance, he could try grabbing the gun, but since the maniac didn't put the safety on even when it was in his pocket, he certainly wouldn't now while pointing it at him. Who knew if it might discharge when he grabbed it? Plus, considering his current speed, with the heavy rain and slippery road, if he got distracted, it could end in an accident involving both of them. It might be better to slow down. If he was going to do anything, it should be after they arrived. If this maniac changed his mind, the driver could get away safely. There was no need for dangerous maneuvers now. Regardless of the driver's thoughts, Komaeda Nagito safely arrived at the destination. The strangest thing was, as soon as Komaeda Nagito opened the car door, the rain stopped. The driver looked back, amazed. "Are you a child of destiny or what? Huh? You said it would stop raining, and it did. You've been wanting these bombs all along, and I'm the unlucky one to run into you, giving them to you for free, right?" His words were half out of frustration and half flattery, hoping Komaeda Nagito would be in a good mood and keep his word to let him go. Komaeda Nagito never planned to do anything to him, so after the driver unloaded the bombs, he indicated the driver could leave. The driver wasn't selling goods, he wasn't about to ask if Komaeda Nagito needed help moving the bombs to the destination or ask for a 5-star review for his service. He immediately left once he finished, terrified that the next moment, the guy might change his mind and decide it was better to eliminate witnesses. Komaeda Nagito, left behind, walked a couple of steps to the foot of a mountain. It wasn't suitable for driving, with thick trees and water dripping down after the recent rain. The scenery here wasn't bad. If you walked around to the other side of the mountain, you'd find a proper road for driving and stone steps for walking. Halfway up the mountain stood a Western-style mansion. It was said to have belonged to a foreign noble before the war, but after the war, the owner left, and no new owner had ever been found, leaving it abandoned. According to Edgar Allan Poe, Mimic's headquarters was likely in that Western-style mansion. Komaeda Nagito organized his stuff under the roots of a tree at the foot of the mountain. First, there were the bomb crates. Some were quite large, including remote-controlled ones and timed ones, all waterproof. They surely weren't cheap, but they also weren't that expensive. Otherwise, someone like the driver wouldn't have been able to afford so many. He hadn't tested their performance yet, so Komaeda Nagito wasn't entirely sure about their quality. After that was a backpack that could be packed. It was also something he borrowed from the driver. There were quite a few tools in that warehouse, but not many that Komaeda Nagito could actually use. Inside the backpack, he had put a binocular, and there was still plenty of space left. Komaeda Nagito stuffed those smaller bombs into the backpack, enough that it wouldn't be too heavy for him to carry. As for the rest of the bomb crates, Komaeda Nagito spread those crates out, placing them, and then chose a spot far from where the bomb was set to climb the mountain. Even though climbing the stone steps would certainly be convenient, Komaeda Nagito, of course, wasn't foolish enough to use them. Wouldn't that be directly exposing himself to the enemy's sight? He could only take the rough and inconvenient path, where there was no proper road. Fortunately, the lower part of the slope wasn't too steep, so although it was troublesome, it wasn't particularly dangerous. Komaeda Nagito hung the binocular around his neck and frequently took it up to look into the distance. Maybe it had just stopped raining, but the sky was still dim, and visibility wasn't great, so Komaeda Nagito hadn't discovered anything along the way. However, similarly, the enemy probably hadn't discovered Komaeda Nagito either. Theoretically speaking, while defending a position, scouts should be deployed to check the surroundings. But there were only about 20 Mimic members left, and with the heavy rain just now reducing visibility, the defensive perimeter would naturally shrink accordingly. Given that mountainous terrain is highly suitable for individual combat, they probably didn't have the intention to conduct guerrilla attacks. Their combat power was likely focused near the mansion, for coordinated response. Hopefully Pokuan guessed correctly, and Mimic hasn't moved their base. After climbing for a while, Komaeda Nagito had to rest for a bit. Fortunately, Yosano Akiko had already healed him, otherwise being up in the mountains would be truly troublesome. Moreover, every now and then along the way, he'd drop a bomb, lightening his backpack, which helped him continue climbing. At present, while resting, Komaeda Nagito casually took out the binocular to take a look, suddenly noticing a glint not far away. In this kind of weather, for him to catch even a glint, Komaeda Nagito's luck was indeed something else. Getting closer to the source of the glint, it was hard to say for sure. Perhaps it was a member of Mimic, maybe a crow carrying a shiny object back to its nest, or maybe something else entirely. Komaeda Nagito wasn't trained and couldn't determine the truth just based on this level of information. However, looking toward the mountain peak, Komaeda Nagito felt that he was probably getting close to the point where the western mansion and he would be on a parallel level. It was possible he would encounter Mimic members soon or perhaps run into some traps. Let's give it a try. Komaeda Nagito thought for a moment, then pulled his backpack over and rummaged through it, finding a remote control. He double-checked the numbers, then pressed down. The next moment, an explosion boomed at the foot of the mountain, even causing the middle of the mountain where Komaeda Nagito stood to shake. The effect was so impressive that it surprised Komaeda Nagito himself. In the midst of this shaking, water droplets from the treetops splattered down, soaking the leaves, and drenched Komaeda Nagito, who had managed to stay dry during the heavy rain. Ignoring his now wet hair, Komaeda Nagito grabbed the binocular to take another look in the direction that had initially seemed suspicious. This time, he saw clearly. There was obvious movement. After comparing it to his previous observation, Komaeda Nagito realized that the figure had moved in his direction, but after the explosion, they no longer moved slowly. Instead, they were quickly changing course, heading toward the source of the explosion. Oh wow, that was close, Komaeda Nagito sighed. If I hadn't detonated it just in time, I would have probably run into them soon. My luck really is good. But I need to hurry. Komaeda Nagito knew very well that compared to those soldiers, his camouflage skills were basically useless, so he hadn't bothered concealing his tracks. When those people arrived at the foot of the mountain, they'd naturally be able to discover his traces and pursue him. Time wasn't on his side. However, diverting their attention could at least buy him some time. So Komaeda Nagito detonated a few more bombs in other directions, hoping to create more confusion for Mimic. After promptly discarding the now useless remote control, Komaeda Nagito found his load even lighter. He didn't rest further, getting up and moving forward with renewed determination. Actually, this time, as he continued, Komaeda Nagito realized that maybe he had detonated too many bombs in one go earlier, causing the mountain to shake too violently. This even triggered some traps to become exposed. It seemed getting kidnapped this time wasn't completely without benefit. By the time Komaeda Nagito finally reached his intended destination, it had started raining again, quickly turning into a downpour. He was now behind the western mansion, and since he was high enough, he could observe the situation near the mansion. The place wasn't built as a military base after all, so the cover was superficial at best. As long as one occupied a high point, one could see everything. The garden of the mansion, originally intended for flowers, had now been abandoned and appeared quite empty. Komaeda Nagito could even see mimic guards stationed there. Komaeda Nagito was deep in thought. Mimic. They must be planning a final showdown with Oda-san, right? This setup, despite the limited personnel, clearly wasn't for a large-scale battle. In that case, it would be best to concentrate the enemy's forces. Thus, Komaeda Nagito began to detonate the bombs he had laid along his way, and the last explosion occurred just at the horizontal line of the mansion and the mountainside. This should be enough to make Mimic realize that the enemy had arrived, prompting those at the foot of the mountain to rush back. The rain kept falling harder, as if that brief pause had only existed to facilitate Komaeda Nagito's climb up the mountain. Komaeda Nagito's appearance now was admittedly a bit miserable, completely drenched, but even if he had an umbrella, he couldn't possibly use it now, as that would instantly reveal his position. Holding the binocular, Komaeda Nagito watched for a while, mumbling to himself. Alright, next is... Bang! A bullet struck the tree next to Komaeda Nagito. Just a moment ago, Komaeda Nagito had used this same tactic to intimidate his kidnapper. Now it was his turn. At this distance, it was undoubtedly a sniper rifle. But it was still quite far, and with the rain, even a highly skilled sniper wouldn't be able to guarantee a kill with a single shot. Komaeda Nagito ducked behind the tree, knowing that he had likely been exposed. The higher he climbed, the fewer trees there were to provide cover, while the number of rocks increased. Naturally, the risk increased compared to before. However, being exposed only now was actually pretty good. Komaeda Nagito had originally assumed Mimic would have discovered him sooner, given their military discipline. Bang! Another shot rang out, and Komaeda Nagito could hear the cracking of the tree beside him. Really, even if they discovered me just 5 minutes later, that would have been fine. Komaeda Nagito cautiously set his backpack down, taking out a remote control and keeping it on him. Then he used his eyes to gauge the distance to his original target. It was a large rock. When Komaeda Nagito had viewed the mountain with the binocular from below, he had noticed that the rock didn't quite seem right. It looked like it could easily trigger a landslide. Back then, Komaeda Nagito had felt it was a sign of good fortune. He had been given bombs and even discovered a precariously placed rock. How could this not be interpreted as assistance in executing his plan? Others might think that since the rock had been there for years without any issues, it would remain safe. However, Komaeda Nagito, having experienced many accidents, had an almost inexplicable sense for danger. Sometimes, he simply knew at a glance, something was going to happen here. Because the area below the rock wasn't suitable for observation, Komaeda Nagito could only take cover on the side. It felt like he was close enough now, though approaching was risky, as the sniper below seemed to have adjusted for wind and rain, with bullets increasingly close to hitting him. Let's give it a try. After gauging the distance between himself and the rock, Komaeda Nagito felt it was close enough. He decided to leave the rest to luck. With all his strength, he threw his backpack towards the rock. Komaeda Nagito hoped it would stop right behind the rock, securing it. If it landed elsewhere, given the slope of the nearby ground, it could easily slide down. Komaeda Nagito, with his usual good fortune, had his luck run out at the critical moment. His backpack struck a rock on the mountain. It didn't explode but was flung away, its trajectory heading towards the edge. Komaeda Nagito could only watch as the backpack fell to the ground, then rolled down due to inertia. Ah, how unfortunate. Was I pushing it too much? Komaeda Nagito sighed. It was only Komaeda Nagito who could feel regret over the failure of such a chaotic plan. An ordinary person wouldn't have thought this plan could succeed from the start. But after this misfortune, shouldn't it be time for some good luck? Maybe I could make it home before dinner. Huh? Suddenly sensing that something wasn't right, Komaeda Nagito widened his eyes, too distracted even to hide, and peeked his head out to look. It could be that he had set off too many explosions today, or maybe the heavy rain had loosened the soil. When his backpack fell, it knocked into some small rocks, and those rocks began rolling down together with the backpack. A few seconds later, he covered his eyes and burst into laughter. What is this? I'm actually still lucky. Though the process was a bit different, the outcome isn't that far from what I imagined. Ha 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 ha. The heavy rain drowned out his maniacal laughter. Inside the mansion, people were undisturbed by the storm outside. The soundproofing was excellent. The phone had just barely started ringing when it was answered. Hello, this is the Armed Detective Agency. What? You're looking for Ranpo-san? Well, Ranpo-san doesn't usually take calls. Could I ask what this is regarding? You can tell me first. The employee of the Armed Detective Agency who answered the phone was a bit confused by the caller's request. The caller was Edgar Allan Poe. After giving Komaeda Nagito the location, he felt as if he'd defeated Edogawa Ranpo, and was so happy he wanted to boast a little. But calling a stranger was a bit awkward for Edgar Allan Poe. He had spent some time preparing himself mentally, listing out all the possible situations he might encounter, and only after calming down a bit did he dial the number for the Armed Detective Agency. The employee listened to Edgar Allan Poe patiently, looking increasingly surprised. Huh? You're saying you defeated Ranpo-san? Edogawa Ranpo, who was leisurely snacking nearby, immediately jumped up upon hearing this. Slander. Ranpo-sama has never lost. Who's spreading such unbelievable lies? Edogawa Ranpo ran over and grabbed the phone. Who are you? Recognizing Edogawa Ranpo's voice, Allan Poe immediately tensed up again. We may have lost to you before. But this time we won. We found the Mimic headquarters. Huh? Edogawa Ranpo blinked. Mimic headquarters? Why do you think that means you've won against Ranpo-sama? Wait a minute, are you the one who took the request I just turned down? Edgar Allan Poe realized the situation wasn't quite what he'd thought, and was stunned for a moment. All the earlier points of doubt finally connected for him at this moment. Come to think of it, Komaeda-kun never said that Ranpo couldn't complete the request, only that Ranpo didn't give him an answer. Not taking the request completely matched what Komaeda-kun had said. Komaeda-kun, why? Edgar Allan Poe was so embarrassed he almost lost consciousness, and in his panic, he hung up the phone. Thankfully, he hadn't given his name. There might still be hope. Edogawa Ranpo frowned slightly as he listened to the hurried hang-up, then ran straight to the president's office. President. What is it? Fukuzawa Yukichi organized the documents in front of him to prevent Edogawa Ranpo from crushing them. Edogawa Ranpo immediately dropped a bombshell. President, your junior disciple went to look for Mimic. The documents fell from Fukuzawa Yukichi's hands. What kind of joke is this? Natsume-sensei said his junior disciple didn't have any special abilities. He hurriedly stood up. Call Yosano, we need a car. Where is Mimic headquarters? Finding the map would take too long, so Edogawa Ranpo ran to the window and pulled back the curtain, pointing towards the distant mountain. President, look over there, that's Mimic headquarters. Suddenly, Edogawa Ranpo fell silent. Fukuzawa Yukichi came over, incredulous, and opened the window. Outside, amidst the torrential rain, he stuck his head out to stare at that mountain, as if a mere few centimeters difference could confirm whether what he saw was an illusion. A landslide. Chapter 76 End.